A cop found a little girl in tears carrying firewood. What his canine uncovered stunned everyone. Dawn crawls over Maple Ridge like a hush before a siren. A small figure appears first. Clara Evans, 9. Sleeves shredded, blue coat fluttering as she hauls a sack that drags a wavering trail through slush. Breath feathers from her lips, tears sting split skin. She avoids every gaze not because she wants to, but because every gaze has learned to pass. Shoes slip on glassy stones. A pale line circles her wrist like a warning ring. The market wakes. Shutters clink. Scales tick. Coal smoke. Across the curb sits Officer Nathan Cole, 39, watching patterns not faces. His canine partner Shadow, a disciplined German shepherd, lifts his muzzle, inhales once, then again deeper as if scent were a code. Finally aligning, a rumble blooms in his chest. Not threat toward the girl, something near her, on her, around her. Nathan steps out, posture steady, voice softer than the wind. "You okay?" Clara nods too quickly, guarding a story behind bitten lips. "Medicine," she whispers. "For Sophie." Shadow circles the sack, then freezes, tail rigid, ears locked. He tests the air near the seams, eyes bright with recognition and alarm. Nathan catches it, a chemical trace riding damp bark, a metallic taste that does not belong to wood, and a silence from onlookers too practiced to be simple apathy. A woman at a stall watches, then flips a sign from open to back. Soon, without moving her eyes, somewhere a bell rings and nobody looks. Nathan offers his thermos. Clara's hands hover, afraid to take help that might cost her later. Shadow's growl deepens, pointing not at danger ahead, but at something buried behind the town's smile. What he is about to uncover won't just save a sick child. It will claw at a sealed past every neighbor swore never existed. Maple Ridge wakes to clinking shutters and stiff bristles scraping frost from stoops. Coal smoke crowns the market, heavy on the tongue, turning breath into pale threads that drift and break. Lamps fade as a thin sun pushes through haze. Icy cobblestones gleam like glass. Slick tricky, already scored by cartwheels and impatient boots. Vendors pull canvas from crates, stack jars, test scales, and hum against the cold, while steam lifts from tin kettles. Beside a leaning lamppost stands Clara Evans, 9, slight under a frayed blue coat patched at both elbows. She holds a burlap sack upright with both hands, rope biting chapped fingers. Wind slides under cuffs and needles bare skin, where a faint ring scars her left wrist. She straightens a scrap of cardboard and checks the chalked price twice before calling. Steady but small. Firewood. Dry. Lights fast. The air steals sound. People pass without pausing. A baker shoulders trays and looks through her. A driver drags boxes from a van and sidesteps without apology. Couple studies oranges like they're deciding history, pretending not to hear when Clara adds, "Quieter, I need medicine for my sister Sophie." Ellen Price arrives early as always, 50 coat button, neat jaw set, gray hair pinned into a precise twist. She unlocks the grocer's grate, lifts it with practiced shoulders, and sweeps a hard gaze across the lane. Those eyes rest on Clara for a heartbeat, then move on. Inside, she aligns labels until every tin faces forward and chalks a tidy sign. When Clara steps toward the doorway asking if she might stand beneath the awning to cut the wind, Ellen's mouth tightens. "Trade happens inside," she says. "Not underfoot, final. No anger, just verdict." Clara swallows and drags the sack back to the lamppost. Her breath fogs and vanishes. Coins change hands all around her. None reach her palm. Jake Riley arrives with 2 friends, 13, shoes scraping stone, voices too loud for early light. He reads Clara's cardboard and sings song. "Special wood?" He nudges the sack with his toe. "Does it cry like its owner?" Laughter pops off brick. Clara keeps her jaw set and repeats the price, adding that shavings are included. Jake angles his grin toward his audience. "Maybe your family learned too much about fires at the mill." One friend looks down, the other waits for a laugh. The joke hangs like smoke that won't clear. Across the curb, Officer Nathan Cole parks his unit and steps into the morning. 39, steady carriage under a winter jacket. He carries a quiet that settles a block. Shadow, his German shepherd partner, drops from the back seat and sits at heel. Attentive, breathing slow, ears pricked just enough to map direction and mood. Nathan scans the market without staring, collecting small facts, red hands, split lips, careful posture, practiced silence, and the way crowds choose not to see. He approaches and crouches, so his eyes meet Clara's. "Morning," he says, calm and warm. You holding up? She shrugs, trying. He slips a small heat pack from his pocket. Take this until your fingers remember blood. She accepts after a second's hesitation. Shadow shifts closer, not pressing, only present. The dog looks at Clara, then at the burlap knot, then back to Nathan with a brief flick that reads like a question. From her doorway, Ellen calls, "Officer, running a shelter now." Nathan doesn't turn. "Helping a neighbor stand upright," he said. Ellen wipes a spotless counter and answers, "Neighbors teach boundaries." Clara moves the sack a few inches, as if the remark carried a broom. Jake hovers between bravado and retreat. Nathan's gaze rests on him. "We were kidding," Jake mutters. "No." Words bruise, Nathan replies evenly. "Pick lighter ones." Jake crumples a chip bag, stuffs it into a pocket, and slides toward magazines, mouth folding around an apology he doesn't quite speak. Wind tugs loose flyers, clacks tin signs, and sends a swirl of pepper from the spice stall. A kettle whistles and stops. A church bell counts the quarter hour. Nathan opens his trunk, pulls a thin thermal blanket, and lifts it like a cape. "May I?" Clara nods. He tucks reflective foil around her shoulders and anchors the corners under the rope, so gusts won't steal it. It crackles, then calms. Heat crawls back across numb knuckles. "Thank you," she says, steadying. "Sophie needs cough syrup and the drops. We're close. I just have to sell a few more." "How old is Sophie?" 5. Shadow noses the burlap seam, attentive but calm. The wood smells clean, dried under a shed roof, cut by small hands guided by a taller pair. Still, the dog returns to the same knot twice, cataloging something faint. Nathan files the note, without showing it. Ellen steps out with a broom, bristles worn flat from years of determined line. "Officer Cole," she says, "people carry long memories. Trouble shadows some names. Distance can be wise." "Distance never cured a cough," he answers, "nor paid for medicine." Ellen holds his gaze, then glances aside. "I have customers." She retreats behind glass, brass, and the bright ring of her till. Clara sells a bundle to a teacher who recognizes her from the hill road. Nathan helps a man load sacks into a hatchback. The man returns and buys wood, wishing Clara luck without looking long. Coins in her pocket grow heavier, but not enough. She counts quietly, lips moving. Sawdust rides the air with coal and the faint tang of bleach from a bucket by the fish stall. Her fingers shake less. Determination stays fixed. "Want to sit?" Nathan asks. "Standing keeps me warm," she said. Then we stand together. He pours tea into a paper cup, swirls in honey from a stick he carries through winter patrols, and passes it over. "Sip." Clara wraps hands around the cup. Heat needles back through skin. She studies the street like a guard, not a child. "People look away," she says, "like standing near us can stain." "Why do they think that?" "They remember the fire," she answers. "They remember Dad." Nathan doesn't push. "Where's your mother?" "Gone." No decoration, just truth set down between them. From the spice stall, a woman lifts a hand, then lowers it. When Ellen glances up, the message swims without speech. "History here has edges, and nobody wants to cut a palm on glass." Under dust, a siren bleats far off, fades, goes quiet. Nathan's radio murmurs routine calls. He stays. A young father buys a bundle for his aunt. His toddler points at Shadow and says, "Dog," with delight. The shepherd accepts a brief scratch, like a courtesy, and returns to stillness. Clara's shoulders drop half an inch as another stack of bills joins the count. Icy cobblestones keep their sheen. Clara's shoes slip as she shifts the sack. Nathan steadies the load and steps back so she keeps ownership. He catalogs detail: a pale ring near the left wrist, patches sewn with mismatched thread, determination performing adult tasks with a child's limb. He also catalogs the town's choreography: ignore, whisper, steer around, repeat. The pattern feels rehearsed. "Almost enough," Clara whispers. A truck growls past, trailing exhaust. Gulls wheel toward the river. The sun climbs, brightening frost, and faces without thawing either. Ellen finishes sweeping and leans the broom in the doorway. For a moment she looks tired rather than stern. "Officer," she says, softer, "you can't fix every story." "No," Nathan replies, "but we can stop adding chapters of neglect." Ellen exhales through her note. "Some chapters were burned. Even ash holds pattern," he says. She doesn't argue. She turns the sign to open and goes back inside. Jake slips out alone. He kicks a pebble, glances up and mumbles, "Sorry." Thank you, Clara answers, meaning he nods and hurries after his friends, shoulders tucked as if shielding a thought that arrived late. The market thickens into a noon rhythm, bargaining layered over a slower current that refuses to quiet. Nathan feels the tug beneath errands, the undertow of a past that keeps hands in pockets and eyes on price tags. For now he keeps goals small: warmth, steadiness, watchfulness. Clara keeps hers clear: sell, count, buy, return. Shadow performs his craft: notice, remember, wait. A final customer picks up 2 bundles for an elderly neighbor and presses extra coins into Clara's palm without ceremony. She counts again. Relief flickers. I can buy the syrup, she says, and the drops. Nathan nods. Good, after you pay, I'll walk you partway up the hill. Clara hesitates. People will see, let them, he says. Walking beside fairness should embarrass nobody. Shadow rises as if agreeing, muzzle tilting toward the burlap knot one last time before he falls in it. Around them the town keeps moving, practiced in looking away, as if silence were habit instead of choice, and as if a family's shadow could wipe out every warm hand until a stranger and his dog refused to step aside. Nathan knelt by the lamppost where Clara steadied the burlap sack. He opened a compact first aid pouch, peeled sterile gauze, and studied the split across her knuckles. Blood beaded along chapped skin, dark against frost. He warmed a wipe between gloved palms so the shock wouldn't sting. Shadow lowered his muzzle to the knot, drawing measured breaths, ears pricked, body still except for a faint rumble buried under training. Hold still, Nathan said, voice even. He cleaned the cut, blotted the edges, wrapped a narrow strip, then layered another pad until the bleeding stopped. Tape sealed the bandage. He checked circulation with a gentle press and nodded when color returned. Clara watched without complaint, jaw tight, eyes dry. Wind pushed through seams and flicked the frayed hem of her blue coat. Around them clinked scales, scraped brooms, and clipped bargaining. The market moving as if kindness might slow profit. From the doorway, Ellen Price snapped, "You're wasting time, officer. That family brings trouble." The word landed heavy. Heads twitched, then turned away. Nathan rose, pulled a thin thermal blanket from his jacket, and wrapped Clara, tucking corners beneath the rope so gusts couldn't steal warmth. Foil crinkled, then settled against worn fabric. Clara exhaled, breath unsteady, but longer. Shadows stepped closer, not blocking, not crowding, simply anchoring space between her and the lane. Her sister needs medicine, Nathan said, tone steady. She's working to buy it. Ellen snorted, broom pausing mid-stroke. Honest? Ask the mill foreman. Ask the sheriff. That name rots goodwill. Nathan's face stayed calm, but memory stirred. Another winter. Another child almost missed because paperwork spoke louder than pain. He remembered a corridor washed in fluorescent glare, a chart buried beneath forms stamped as sieved, and a clock that kept counting while adults debated procedure. He blinked the image away and tightened focus on the girl in front of him. Thank you, Clara whispered, lifting her bandaged hand like a promise not to stop. Nathan nodded. The spice seller hesitated, then resumed packing jars. A driver rattled a dolly over uneven stone. A man counted change twice, as if arithmetic could blunt conscience. The lane breathed shallowly, synchronized in avoidance. Ellen stepped forward, chin lifted. You're not her guardian, Cole. Compassion without caution breeds mess. Nathan met her stare. Caution without compassion breeds harm. Shadow's tail tapped once, then still. Nathan crouched again so his eyes met Clara's. Can you flex those fingers? She tested the wrap and nodded. It stings less. Good. Keep them dry. Sell only if you feel steady. I'll stay until you're finished. Jake drifted back, bravado cooled by curiosity. He studied the neat bandage, the foil's careful tuck, the dog's alert calm. Is she okay? He asked. Quieter now. Getting there, Nathan said. Help by making room, not noise. Jake nodded and nudged his friends away. The lull left officer, partner, child and grocer, locked in a fragile geometry that felt like a verdict waiting to be written. Cold sank through seams. The blanket radiated heat into Clara's shoulder. She held a paper cup Nathan had pressed into her hands earlier, sipping honeyed tea in small, precise sips, as if spilling a drop might erase progress. Shadow drank from a collapsible bowl, then returned to post. Each time a cart clattered past, his head turned, mapped, reset. Each time the burlap shifted, his nose dipped, testing a faint metallic tang that rode the seam rather than the wood. Nathan planted a small sign to keep shoppers from clipping her. Step wide, he said, polite but firm. Whenever a shoulder drifted close, some complied, some scowled, others pretended not to hear. Light brightened, without warming anything except the brass fixtures inside Ellen's store. She resumed sweeping, bristles whispering across stone in tight, irritated strokes. People ignore me, Clara said, watching boots shuffle by, like looking hurt. Looking clearly challenges myths some folks protect, Nathan answered. Ellen stiffened. You call prudence a myth. I call rumor a blanket thrown over empathy, he said. Her mouth tightened, then loosened when a customer asked for eggs. Coins rang. A drawer slammed. Routine resumed. Nathan studied the knot again. The wood looked ordinary, but the air along the cordage carried that off note. Chemical, faint, wrong buried under sap. He filed the detail, refusing to let curiosity outrun care. He checked Clara's cheeks, found raw patches rimmed by frost nip. Rub gently, he said, showing the motion with the back of his glove. She copied him, avoiding the wrap. A gust lifted loose flyers into a spiral. One slapped glass, clung, slid down. Far off, a bell tolled. The market continued its ritual of selective attention. Nathan kept tempo with it while choosing deliberate moments to break the beat. After you buy the medicine, I'll walk you partway home, he told Clara. She glanced toward the hill. People might say things. They already do, he said. Walking safely isn't a scam, Ellen muttered. Some roads carry history. History can teach without handcuffs, he replied. Shadows stiffened, ears sharpened, paws set, chest lifted. A quiet growl vibrated once, then stopped as he glanced up for direction. Nathan knelt beside the sack. He didn't open it. He traced the source of the scent along damp fibers, not the wood, as if the rope had kissed something it shouldn't. He pictured a failing heater, a leaky stovepipe, a thin blanket, a girl named Sophie breathing shallow in a dim room. The old case tugged again, silence as a weapon, speed as a shield. Ellen reappeared, thrust a small packet toward Nathan. Bandages, she said, curt, almost embarrassed. Add it to the tab. He blinked. She flushed. Don't grandstand. I keep supplies for emergencies. He took it. Thank you, he said, without triumph, without bite. She frowned at gratitude, like it was a dialect she didn't speak, and retreated to her counter. Clara straightened and called to a passing pair. Dry kindling, fast start, fair price. They slowed, inspected, bought 2 bundles. Coins slid into her palm. Relief loosened her shoulders by a notch. Nathan checked the time, noted shift overlap, decided to stay anyway. His radio murmured routine chatter. He acknowledged, then returned his attention to the only call that mattered. Why do people hate our name? Clara asked, not pleading, only seeking. Sometimes a story gets told once, Nathan said, then repeated until doubt seems rude. Repetition hardens into rule. New facts feel like an attack. She nodded, as if she had already guessed that answer and needed an adult to say it aloud. A cluster of teens passed. One whispered, something cruel. Another nudged him, and the insult died without echo. Shadow didn't twitch. His attention stayed on the knot, on the seam, on whatever whisper hid beneath sap. Wind shifted, carrying river damp and a thin thread of oil. Nathan marked the direction. He imagined questions for later. Who tied the knot? Where the sack rested overnight? Which hands lifted it first? Whether a shed door sticks? Whether a stovepipe leaks? He kept those thoughts submerged so Clara wouldn't see worry and think she had done wrong. Crowds thickened, thinned, returned. Boots squeaked. A kettle sang. Copper rattled. A gull dived, stole a crust, vanished. Nathan watched small things, because small things reveal the shape of big ones. He steadied the space with presence rather than speeches, letting patience do work. Other people avoided. Ellen stood in the threshold, arms folded tight. You can't save everybody. I can notice the person in front of me, he said, and keep her alive long enough for truth to matter. She rolled a shoulder, as if easing a knot she wouldn't name. A fragile truce settled, uneasy but real. Clara counted money. Almost there, she said. Nathan smiled with his eyes. We'll make sure you reach the pharmacy. He studied Shadow's posture, then spoke softly for the dog alone. Good read. The shepherd blinked once, and resumed his silent watch. Nathan turned slightly toward the street, not preaching, not pleading, letting the sentence carry on its own. Ever seen someone overlooked? Share a time you helped someone in need. It drifted over steam and chatter, gentle as an open door, heavy as a mirror. Frost clung to stone. Foil winked in pale light. The bandage held. Clara stood taller because someone stayed. Nathan stood because leaving would echo every choice that trained this town to walk by. Shadow stood because instincts never drop, while answers hide. Behind Nathan's calm suspicion gathered shape. A scent that shouldn't ride cordage. A silence too organized to be random. A child pushing wood through a market that warmed itself while pretending not to see. Something was wrong here, and the dog had already found the first thread. Nathan eased the cruiser from the curb while Clara held the burlap sack against her knees, foil blanket folded across her lap like a shield. Shadow sat upright behind them, head angled toward the window, nose working as the car climbed the hill toward the river bluffs. Maple Ridge slid past in cold frames. Brick rows, frosted roofs, a steeple stinging the pale sky. Clara watched landmarks with the alert patience of someone who knows shortcuts. Not because they save minutes, but because they avoid looks. She directed him at turns with small gestures, voice quiet, every answer trimmed to essentials. They left asphalt for a rutted lane where puddles had become brittle plates. Pine leaned over a chain-link fence, needles dusted white. A mailbox leaned the other way, paint peeled, numbers half missing. The cabin lurked at the end of a short path. Clapboards warped by weather, a porch tilting, 2 steps soft enough to groan when Nathan tested them. He cut the engine and listened. Wind sifted through trees. Somewhere a distant truck downshifted. From inside came nothing beyond a low hiss. Faint, wrong riding silence, like a parasite. Clara hurried to the door. Nathan caught her sleeve. Gentle. Let me go first. She nodded. Shadow placed himself between them in the jam, then looked back for permission. Nathan opened carefully. Air pressed out, heavy and dull, metallic on the tongue. The living area crouched beneath a sagging ceiling. Walls spotted with mildew, corners furred by damp. A small iron stove glowed through a seam of ash. The faint hiss grew into a whispering thread that made Shadow's hackles rise. He barked once, sharp, then moved to the stove. Paw lifted, eyes cutting to Nathan with urgent focus. Sophie, Clara called. A fragile answer floated from a side room, barely formed. Nathan crossed toward the doorway and found the child on a narrow cot. Cheeks flushed and unhealthy cherry. Hair plastered, breath short and shallow, as if each one had to negotiate permission. A thin blanket lay over bones and angle. A glass sat on a crate beside the cot, rim sticky, matches rested near a candle stub. The draft slipped under a warped frame, cold enough to sting, not enough to clean the air that pooled like unseen water. Shadow barked again, closer to a warning than an alarm. Nathan moved fast. He pulled the stove door, smothered embers with ash and damp sand from a bucket near the woodpile, then shut it tight. He cracked windows, shouldered open a swollen back door, and propped it with a brick. He found a carbon monoxide detector still boxed on a shelf, torn plastic hanging from one corner, batteries sealed inside the package. He ripped it open, snapped the cells into place and set the unit on a table. The thing woke, blinked, then screamed. Numbers climbed, then steadied above danger. He swore under his breath and carried Sophie into the front room where air began to crawl. He laid her across the couch, elevated her head with a folded coat, and coached Clara through slow inhales, urging joint rhythm to draw cleaner air through both lungs. Stay awake, sweetheart, Nathan said to the little sister. Listen to your big sister's counting. Clara counted in a whisper, every number a rope thrown toward shore. Shadow patrolled, then chose a spot with line of sight to stove, door and windows, body a still metronome ticking through hazard towards safety. Nathan stepped outside, dialed dispatch for an ambulance, and gave the address twice, forcing calm through the line. He returned and felt Sophie's forehead. Heat poured through thin skin. He checked pulses, capillary refill, and the pale inside of her lip. He handed Clara a bottle of water and told her to sip, then give her sister small amounts between breaths. When the detector finally fell silent, the air felt less murderous. The room held shapes again instead of shadows. Nathan walked the perimeter of the main space, noting scorch marks near the stovepipe joint, a hairline crack across the elbow and soot prints above the mantel that mapped a scrap of wool hung from a nail, singed at one edge. A curtain bore a faint gray halo. Clara watched him rid the room and seemed to relax, as if observation itself mended something people had allowed to fret. On a shelf near the couch, a crooked frame held a photo of a tired man kneeling beside 2 children under summer light. The older girl laughed with mouth open, The younger stared at the camera with serious eyes. A name had been scratched into the glass with something sharp. Jane. Beside the frame sat a shoebox tied with twine. It looked ordinary, yet the knot mirrored the burlap loop on the sack. The same practical hand, the same quick method. Nathan slid the box closer and untied the string. Inside lay folded receipts, a rusted key and a thin envelope softened by years. He eased the letter out, paper flaked at creases. Ink had thinned where tears had fallen, leaving salt scars. The handwriting staggered, as if written on a knee by someone out of time. The top line read, "To my girls," followed by a plea stripped of ornament. Apology braided with instruction. It warned them never to trust easy explanations, urged them to hide documents behind the stove bricks, and begged whoever found the page to protect both children if truth decided to turn vicious. At the bottom, a date, October. A line beneath it mentioned the mill fire in tight strokes that clenched harder with each word. Not accident. Records burned. Money moved. Sheriff says hush. The signature trembled. James Evans. Nathan's chest tight. The smell rising off the paper carried dust, smoke, and the faint sourness of fear that lingers after sleepless nights. He glanced toward the stove bricks. One corner looked newer than the rest, mortar paler, as if patched by a hurried hand. He slid a thin blade from his pocket and tapped gently until a hollow echo answered. He chiseled with care, pried loose a small block, and reached into a cavity. Shadow crept close, eager yet calm, nose tracking his fingertips. Nathan withdrew a plastic bag wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were photocopied forms bearing town letterhead, a ledger page listing emergency disbursements from a relief fund, and a photograph of the mill's loading dock smothered in foam, while three figures loomed near a truck tailgate. One figure wore a sheriff's jacket, another held a jerry can. Sophie stirred and coughed, the sound raspy but stronger. Clara knelt, stroked her sister's hair, and whispered about tea that would taste like honeyed sunshine when the paramedics arrived. Nathan put the papers back, then moved to the stovepipe and scraped soot from the elbow into a tray. The flakes smelled faintly of petroleum beyond usual residue. He sealed them in a sample bag and labeled it with date, time, and location, using a marker from his chest pocket. He photographed the joint from multiple angles and took wider shots to map context. He kept movement quiet, efficient, and calm as cold air began to clear, while Shadow watched the door. Fog rolled off the river and laced Maple Ridge with a damp hush that swallowed footsteps and softened lamps into halos. Nathan parked a block from Town Hall, killed the lights, and sat with Shadow in the dark until his pulse matched the engine's cooling tick. He checked his watch, noted the patrol pattern, and listened to the town breathe. A gull barked once and settled. Farther uphill, a lonely truck changed gears, then faded. He zipped his jacket, clipped a small camera to a chest harness, and slid nitrile gloves into his pocket with a folded microfiber cloth. Shadow shifted to the door, poised, ears forward, eyes bright with patient focus. They moved through the alley where ivy hid brick like camouflage. Condensation beaded along downspouts and dripped onto trash can lids with a metronome's patience. Town Hall loomed ahead, a square building of red stone and pale trim, its bell tower drawn faint against cloud. The front lights burned for show. The side entrance wore darkness like a cloak. Nathan knelt by a service door, studied the frame, then eased a keyed access card he'd lawfully carried for emergency utilities. The lock gave a mild complaint and rolled. He paused and listened to air move. Fog pressed into the corridor like wool. Shadow entered low and quiet, placing each paw with care. Creaking stairs waited beyond a narrow hall where plaques displayed names and dates. Nathan mapped each riser and shifted weight over edges at a steady tempo that makes wood accept a stranger. The building answered with small groans and settled. On the second floor, a light buzzed behind frosted glass in the clerk's office. He avoided it and turned down a dim passage that fed into the archives. The door sat closed, blinds drawn, knob cold. His key turned, the latch eased. He exhaled through his nose, lifted his chin, and tasted dust that had not moved all day. Shelves rose in tight rows, metal uprights marching beneath low ceiling tiles. Labels peeled at corners, boxes slept with numbered spines, orderly and mute. The room held the old paper tang of a place built to store memory and rules. The center aisle carried a faint petroleum ghost, not sharp, not fresh, a breath of something that once flared hot. Shadow froze, nose high, then dipped and tracked along the right wall. Passing deeds, permits, voter lists, school rosters, until he halted at a half-buckled carton shoved behind a stack that did not quite belong. He pawed the metal lip, then sat, tail still, head canted as if pointing without moving. Nathan slid the box free and read the faded marker. Mill, Incident 2 days, Ninoax. Dust traced his gloves. He set the carton on a table beneath a weak dome lamp and lifted the lid. Inside lay photo envelopes, a ledger wrapped in butcher paper, and a packet labeled Eciatetes. Relief. The smell rose, old smoke glued to fiber, adhesive aging into a sweet bite, and a light gasoline echo like rainbows on a puddle. He opened an envelope and spread contact sheets across the table. Black and white frames showed the loading dock, foam layered like snow, a conveyor spur, hoses looping like veins and figures grouped near a pickup. One frame caught a shoulder patch shaped like a star. Another showed a hand tilting a can at an angle that made sense only if water had missed, and heat still crawled. He unwrapped the ledger, pages whispered as they turned. Columns bore careful rows of dates and amount. Annotations in a tidy hand repeated two phrases at intervals, records destroyed, and funds rerouted. Sometimes a line pointed to a project code that did not exist on the index pasted inside the cover. He photographed every page, top to bottom, including coffee rings, smudges, and a thumbprint torn into the margin. He paused over an entry dated November 6, 2020, where relief money earmarked for safety upgrades at the mill's dryer room had been shifted to civic beautification, followed by an arrow and docs lost. See clerk then in smaller script per. Shadow padded back to the aisle and sniffed the floor. His ears cupped forward, his breathing shifted into short assessments. Nathan followed the change and crouched to study scuffs along linoleum, where a box had been dragged. Then he traced the streaks to a low shelf labeled Archives Hold. A slimmer carton hid behind manuals on event permits. This one wore no label. He slid it out, lifted the lid, and found a plastic sleeve full of negatives and a stapled memo stamped intern. The memo's first line read, "Consolidate relief documents before audit. Duplicate images not needed." A note in pencil added, "Burned per directive." Nathan photographed the memo, then each negative against the lamp, documenting the order so sequence could be rebuilt later. A hum pulsed through the walls as the boiler cycled. The clock over the door thunked to the next minute. Fog pressed the windows into opaque panel. Nathan felt the floor's slight spring and imagined footsteps from another era. Clerks carrying tins of tacks, a janitor whistling after hours, a man in a dark coat locking cabinets because someone asked him to. He marked that feeling and returned to the work. He checked the ledger again, tracing entries that lined up with receipts in the packet. Some invoices bore neat stamps. Others carried initials in a different shade of ink. Several matched the date on the letter behind the stove brick. He thought of the signature that wobbled at the end, James Evans. The name made the room feel smaller. He photographed a 2-page spread, where records destroyed appeared, 3 times with arrows pointing towards storage basement. He looked up and listened. The building held its breath. Shadow lifted his head toward the rear stairwell. That path led down to a caged storage room used for inactive materials and holiday displays. Nathan killed the lamp, cracked the door, and moved with his partner through the hall. The stairwell smelled of wax, chalk dust, and the faintest gasoline thread, old but stubborn. Each tread announced weight with a faint whine. He compensated by distributing pressure across edges, a trick learned in buildings where sound serves as a guard. Below, a padlock held a chain across a cage door. He scanned the shackle, found a municipal tag number, and checked it against the master key ring. The lock opened without drama. Inside, boxes sat 6 high, their tops bowed, a seasonal banner draped over a trunk painted with stars. Behind it, in the corner, a carton with water stains rested on the floor rather than a shelf, as if someone placed it there in haste and never came back. Shadow touched it with his nose and sat. Nathan pulled it forward and cut the tape. Damp cardboard rasped. Inside lay a crusted can ring, charred paper curls, fused into a puck, and a ledger fragment with a torn edge that matched the binding style upstairs. The fragment carried 2 hard lines, records destroyed, and beneath it, funds rerouted, followed by a half initial that could be an H or W. He stepped back and listened to the building again. No footsteps, no voices, only far plumbing twitch and fog knocking faintly at vents. He took swabs from the carton's bottom where a glossy residue had dried years ago. It smelled like the same faint rainbow he had tasted in Clara's rope, a whisper of accelerant that patience cannot scrub out. He sealed the swabs in tubes, logged time, location, and description with a pen tucked behind the camera plate, and stowed them in a pouch marked evidence. He photographed the container, the stain, the fragment, and the exact shelf gap where the box had sat. Then took a wider shot that captured the banner and trunk for orientation. They climbed back up, slower now, letting the building catch up to their presence without recoiling. In the archives room, he stood under the dim lamp again, checked that the ledger sat square, that the envelopes lay where he found them, and that the dust pattern matched. He closed the door, wiped the knob with the cloth, and waited until the air regained stillness. He thought of Clara holding her sister's hand, counting breaths. He thought of a letter dated late October, a signature that trembled, and initials scribbled under a sketch of the mill floor. The faint gasoline thread seemed to hang across both spaces, cabin and hall, like a line someone hoped no one would trace. At the exit, he paused and let his voice ride the fog in a whisper, meant for anyone who needed a nudge toward courage. What would you do to expose a lie? Share your thoughts below. He tucked the thought away and watched the alley for a long count, scanning angles, letting eyes and ears confirm what trained intuition had already mapped. Shadow leaned into his leg once, that small press that reads like a nod between partners. He returned to the cruiser, synced the camera to a secure drive, tagged files with location codes, timestamps, and chain identifiers, then dictated a brief note into his recorder, covering conditions, smells, labels, placements, and lock. He updated a private log that never touched the network, a habit learned the hard way. He sent copies of the photographs to a protected evidence folder and printed a minimal set on a portable unit, just enough to anchor a warrant request, without telegraphing the entire hand before he secured witnesses. Fog thickened until streetlights wore halos like saints. Town hall receded into murk. Nathan rested his hands on the wheel and let breath even out. The investigation had edges now, a ledger that moved money into shadow, paperwork that admitted destruction as policy, photographs that placed a can where water and foam should have washed truth clean, and a pencil note pointing toward a name that matched the initials on the letters reversed. Shadow settled, still alert even in repose, the kind of readiness that waits rather than sleeps. He drove off slowly, evidence secured, while Shadow watched the fog curl around streetlights and waited for the next step. Quietly. Cold bled through the town hall basement like a slow leak from stone. Nathan eased the archives door inward and stepped into air that smelled of dust, wax, and the memory of wet rope. A single bulb hummed, throwing a weak cone over metal shelving and stacked cartons. Shadow slipped through beside him, shoulders low, tail steady, ears tuned to currents that humans miss. Their breath showed in faint threads, then vanished, swallowed by the chill that lives under public buildings after the day's heat leaves. He moved toward the ledger table where he had left the box squared and the envelopes aligned. Patterns on the dust still matched his earlier touch. He reached for the butcher paper bundle when a voice folded the room shut. "Stop right there, Cole." Sheriff Daniel Holt filled the doorway with the authority of a uniform that had seen decades of budgets, storms, and favors. 57, broad in the shoulders, jaw like carved oak, lines set into his face from years of stern speeches and long drives. Gray threaded his close-cut hair. Scar tissue tugged at one eyebrow. His eyes, neither bright nor dull, watched with the patient cold of a man who believes time bends to his will. A hand rested on the jamb as if the building itself backed his warning. Shadow's growl rolled up from deep within. Not loud, not theatrical, just a line drawn on the floor. Nathan did not shush him. He turned slowly, kept one palm open, the other on the cardboard lid, weight centered, voice even. "Evening, Sheriff." Holt's tone carried gravel. "Evening, nothing. You're trespassing, digging where you don't belong. Close that up and walk away." "This room holds town records," Nathan said. "Nothing here belongs to silence. You're off duty." Holt took a single step inside. The bulb marked the contours of his weathered face, wind-burned cheeks, a crease at the mouth, shadows at the jaw. "Take the night. Let real people handle real problems." "Such as?" Nathan asked, not moving his hand from the lid. The carton felt cold through the glove. Shadow shifted so that his body cut a diagonal between both men, head turned slightly toward Holt, eyes locked, lips closed over quiet teeth. Holt glanced at the box label, his mouth flattened. "Auxiliary incident notes, old junk. Already reviewed, already cleared. By whom?" "By people who know context." Holt's voice softened to menace. "Context is everything, Cole. Your compassion makes you sloppy. You see a girl with a bundle and think the world owes her a miracle. I see a child almost poisoned by a stove and a rope that smells like accelerant," Nathan said. "I see ledgers that speak in euphemisms." Holt smiled without warmth. "Words on paper don't convict anyone. They also don't give you authority to break in. I used a municipal key." The building isn't a vault. These are public files. Under my peer review, Holt said. Chain of custody runs through my office. Close the box. Nathan slid the lid tighter, then lifted the entire carton into his arms. Then we'll bring it to your office. Holt's hand came off the jam. Set that down. Not until I log the contents in secure copies. The stare that followed had weight. Holt stepped closer, slow and certain, boots whispering over concrete. He stopped in the frame of the weak light. The bulb drew out every year he'd carried a badge. Burned skin at the neck, pale grooves under eyes, sun-creased forehead, the kind of wear that can read as honor or habit, depending on the day. Tonight it read as warning. You're going to make yourself very lonely. Holtz, this town remembers who helps and who disrupts. Don't be the man who makes winter longer. Nathan's breath plumed and faded. Winter ends when heat returns, Sheriff. Some of us brought matches. Shadow's growl deepened by a fraction, the volume of a thought in a quiet room. Holt glanced at the dog, then back at Nathan. Call him off. He's reading posture, Nathan said. So am I. Drop the hero routine. Holt's voice lowered. You think there's some great cover-up. There isn't. Accidents happen. Paperwork reflects reality, not fantasy. Step away from that table. I'm not at a table, Nathan said, still holding the box. I'm at a threshold. Holt's eyes cooled another degree. You want to play clever? Fine. Here's clever. You have no warrant. You have no clearance for after-hours access. And you're about to remove materials that aren't signed out. That looks like theft. It looks like preservation, Nathan answered. Materials with water stains and gasoline residue shouldn't sit under a holiday banner. Say that again, very slowly. While remembering your career depends on tone, Holt said. Nathan measured the gap between them and set his. A ledger fragment downstairs has petroleum curls in cardboard fibers. A memo upstairs mentions burning duplicates. If that sounds like routine archiving, I need a new dictionary. Holt's jaw bunched. You think you've discovered something grand? You have. You're inventing scandal because it flatters your conscience. The detector screamed at the Evans cabin, Sheriff. Sophie's pulse changed under oxygen. That stove could have ended a life tonight. I found a letter behind bricks with a date and a name. The initials point toward an off-site ledger kept by a person whose identity I already suspect. Holt's eyebrow twitched. You suspect a lot. Suspicions break people when they spread. Are you ready to own that? I'm ready to own evidence. Nathan. He set the box on the table so he could reach a small camera clipped to his chest. He tapped the record switch, then raised the lens toward the ledger's spine. For clarity, I'm documenting the condition of materials located in the town archives, including labels in place. Holt watched the red light with a hunter's patience. Turn that off. I'm preserving a record. You're building a case in a basement with a dog and a borrowed light. That how you want your career footnote to read? I'd prefer truth on the first page, Nathan. Holt took another step. Shadow eased forward until shoulder muscles tightened like coiled rope. The growl returned, still controlled, a steady line that erased any doubt about boundaries. Holt paused. You train him to threaten elected officials. I trained him to protect. Protecting space isn't your mandate tonight. Protecting children is. Protecting records that explain why children were left breathing poison is. Big words, Holt said. Dangerous one. He shifted his stance, toes angled, hand hovering near his belt in a gesture that could read as habit or signal. You don't want to make me choose between dignity and arrest. Then don't choose, Nathan said. Walk upstairs with me. We log this together. We call the county, request an outside audit, and put a neutral clerk between us and every page. Holt's gaze held, then slid to the shelves. For a breath, a different man flickered through the weathered mask. Tired, cornered, calculating. County won't touch an old mill incident without provocation, he said. You don't have it. Nathan tapped the camera again so the audio mark clicked. Sheriff Daniel Holt has refused to participate in joint logging of materials and has discouraged external review. Holt's lip curled. Cute. Neutral, Nathan said. Useful in court. The bulb buzzed louder. A tiny storm in glass. Condensation ticked in the duct. Somewhere above them a door whispered shut, followed by the settled silence of an empty hallway. The basement seemed to draw closer, walls leaning in, concrete radiating stored night. Holt inhaled through his nose. Last offer, Cole. Leave the box. Go home. Sleep. I'll escort you out and forget this happened. Nathan pictured Clara counting breaths with Sophie. He pictured the ledger fragment he had sealed, the photograph with the can, the note about duplicates burned, the penciled initials, the grimy holiday banner hiding a stain. He spoke softly. No. Holt stepped into the circle of light, until lines etched by sun and wind looked like cracks cut by frost. Weather had carved him into the sheriff Maple Ridge wanted. Sturdy, direct, hard to move. It had also made a mask that could hide anything a tired town allowed. He set a hand on the box lid and pushed. Shadow launched a single warning bark that shook dust from rafters. Holt's hand paused on cardboard. Nathan kept his other palm open, voice level. "Don't do that. You going to bite me, Cole?" Holt asked, heat bleeding into the ground. "No," Nathan said, "but my partner might decide you crossed a boundary." Silence settled like ash. Holt withdrew his hand. Slow, careful. "You're making enemies." "I'm making a record," Nathan said. "Enemies announce themselves. Records can be lost. Copies travel." "You playing courier now?" "Tonight I'm a steward." Holt's eyes narrowed. "Watch your words. I choose them on purpose." The sheriff's shoulders rose then fell. "You want upstairs, fine. We'll go. But you step where I tell you. You sign what I put in front of you. You keep that camera pointed at the floor." Nathan met the conditions with silence. He lifted the box, nodded once to Shadow, and moved to stairs, 3 paces behind Holt, far enough to guard the carton, close enough to watch his hands. Each tread groaned like a withheld opinion. The hallway beyond breathed cold. A light near the clerk's office flickered. As they reached the first landing, Holt stopped and turned, blocking the way with broad shoulders. "One last caution," he said. "Men who think they're crusaders usually end up alone." "I'm not alone," Nathan said. Shadow stood at his knee, steady, eyes steady. The weight of hidden pages warmed his arms through cardboard. Resolve set like steel under winter water. Plans arranged themselves with a quiet that felt like focus. A call to the county attorney before dawn. A sworn statement with photographs attached. A request for temporary custody of the archives room under seal. And a visit to a retired mill hand whose initials matched a scribble on a diagram. The next move would not happen in this basement, and it would not be announced. Holt searched his face and found nothing he could bend. He stepped aside. "After you," he said, with a smile that mistook itself for grace. Nathan walked past him without turning his back fully, climbed to the main hall and headed for the clerk's desk, where forms waited, and cameras watched. The basement door clicked behind them, and the cold followed like a witness with a long memory. The repair shop squatted behind the rail spur, a long rectangle of corrugated tin stitched with patches that the wind rattled whenever a freight rolled past. Nathan parked in the gravel beside a mound of scrap and cut the engine. Shadow hopped down, shook once, and fixed on the doorway where a strip of fly tape trembled. The air tasted of oil, hot metal, and old smoke. A sign over the entrance read "Walsh and Sons" in letters that had lost their shine years ago. The ensigns scuffed thin as if time had eroded. Promise faster than paint. Inside, sparks leapt from a welding torch and scattered like bright insects across a sheet of steel. An old radio muttered weather and ball scores through static. The shop floor wore permanent stains that refused every mop. Chains hung from ceiling beams. A hoist creaked. Tools lay in neat rows on a board blackened by decades of hands. In the back, a space heater clicked, fighting a draft that slid under the bay door. The place smelled like work performed in winter. Hot iron, grease, and effort. Henry Walsh lifted his visor and set the torch aside. 58, barrel-shouldered, gone, slightly soft. Hair like iron filings turned gray. Hands knuckled by labor. A jaw that tried to look stubborn when guilt kept asking for a hearing. His denim jacket shined at the elbows. His boots carried a permanent haze of ash. He saw the badge first, then the dog, then Nathan's eyes. A muscle in his cheek kicked. He wiped his hands on a rag that had long since given up any hope of being clean. "Shop's closed," he said, though the door sat open and the radio acted like it owned the place. "I need a few minutes," Nathan replied. "About the mill. About a fire people still call an accident." Henry's glance slid toward a locker in the corner. A magnet held photos beneath chipped paint. A younger man beside a loading dock. A woman laughing under a picnic shelter. A crew lined up in matching shirts, their smiles tight. He shut the locker so the pictures faced metal instead of questions. "People say a lot," he muttered. "Talking pumps heat into rooms that should stay cool. Cool rooms hide rot," Nathan said. He kept his tone steady, hands visible. Shadow stood at heel, eyes tracking Henry's posture rather than his words. Henry gestured toward a stool. "Sit." Nathan remained standing. The dog stayed on concrete, nose moving in slow evaluations of the air, as if scent were a ledger that had never been closed. Henry noticed and tried a half smile that couldn't lift. "He always that serious?" When the air tells stories, Nathan said. The welder clicked as it cooled. Heat lines shimmered above the steel plate, then disappeared. Outside, a train horn dragged a long note across the yard and quiet returned like a held breath. Henry rubbed a thumb across a burn scar at his wrist, skin shiny where tissue had learned new rules. I was part of that fire, he said without ceremony. Not the way folks think. Nathan waited. Silence in this kind of confession behaves like a crank handle. Patience turns it until truth starts to rise. Henry reached for the jacket hung on a hook by the locker door. Shadow stepped forward and pressed his nose to the sleeve, then to the collar seam. He inhaled once, twice, a third time, then looked at Nathan with the kind of stillness that carries meaning. Nathan touched the coat and felt stiffness along the hem where fibers had fused and later cracked. An old chemical ghost lingered in the fabric, faint but stubborn, the smell a mechanic cannot mistake even years after a spill. You know what that is, Henry said, voice low. I know what it was. Henry nodded, as if the correction relieved him. I did not set the place blazing by myself, he said, but I carried a can where I shouldn't. I laid rags where burn would jump faster. I signed forms those days, and told myself payroll depended on quiet. A man can believe anything when fear keeps two hands on his throat. What? Nathan asked. He didn't soften the word. The room had spent years avoiding it. Henry shut off the radio, maybe to hear himself. The shop sounded larger without its mutter. The mill bled money after the new equipment contracts never landed. Management rerouted funds meant for safety into a fund that paid appearances. They called it cushioning. Inspectors drifted through, looked at what they were guided to see, and checked boxes, because nothing jumped at them with teeth. He rubbed his mouth. One afternoon, the foreman called me into the office and said the insurance people were on edge, and the board would do anything to keep lights on. He slid a ledger across the desk and told me to move duplicates to a storage room. Then he told me which pages should go missing. I hated how easy my hands learned the route. And the fire. A message, Henry said. And a cleanup. We were told to box duplicates, move ledgers and lose anything that made numbers fight with the narrative. A man with a star on his shoulder stopped by after hours and watched while we carried stacks to a truck. He said he would handle disposal at a secure facility. I saw what facility meant when I smelled the can. His eyes went to the jacket again. I kept this as punishment, I think. A reminder that my hands helped something ugly. Shadow circled the coat once more, then sat, alert without tension. Verdict delivered by biology rather than anger. Nathan studied Henry's face. Weather had knotted that skin, but guilt had done the carving. James Evans? Nathan. Henry's jaw worked. Not a villain, not a saint. A man who refused to sign a line that would have patched a lie with his name. He argued. He threatened to go to the county. He went home and wrote letters nobody wanted to hear. When the place lit, he tried to haul a tangled hose alone, because the station crew was late, and we'd bleached safety drills into ceremony. He choked on smoke and went down. Folks said he tripped. Folks say a lot when they need a story quick. Nathan let air move through his chest slowly. You said a man with a star watched. You mean the sheriff? Henry didn't answer for a full breath. Then he nodded once, a small motion that still rang like metal on metal. He believed the town needed protection from scandal. He believed budgets needed a cushion more than lungs needed clean air. He told me the county would shut the mill if numbers came out. He looked at me like a neighbor when he asked for help. I did what he asked. I told myself families would keep eating and winter would pass. The winter did pass. The lie didn't. Sparks from the still hot plate popped and faded. The heater clicked again and chased cold into corners. Nathan took a slow step toward the chair, but did not sit. You kept anything? Henry swallowed. His eyes slid toward a toolbox that lived under the bench. He pulled it free and lifted the lid. The hinges complained. Beneath wrenches and a set of feeler gauges lay a plastic sleeve wrapped in old shop rags. He unrolled it with hands that tried not to shake. Inside rested 3 photographs and a torn ledger strip. The photographs showed the loading dock when foam still clung to the curb, a pickup back to the door and 2 silhouettes near the tailgate. One silhouette wore that star on fabric shaped like a thorn. The ledger strip carried 4 words that had taught Nathan to hate euphemism: records destroyed and funds rerouted. Nathan photographed every inch with the small camera from his chest rig. He set scale beside the items, noted the time, and logged them into a temporary custody sheet he kept folded in his notebook. Shadow watched the doorway and then the windows, nose lifting whenever a gust pushed across the threshold. The dog's tail did not wag. Duty kept its own beat. Henry sat on the stool, elbows on knees, hands folded like a man at a bedside. I wake in the dark and feel heat that isn't there, he said. My wife left 2 winters after the fire, because I stopped talking unless the radio told me what to say. I keep this place busy so the quiet doesn't bury me. You want confession? You've got it. You want proof? You've got enough to start. You want courage? You'll have to lend some. Nathan slid the sleeve back toward Henry, just long enough for him to understand respect, then placed it into an evidence pouch. You'll testify, he said, not as a threat, not as a dare, but as if stating weather that had rolled in from the river. Henry looked at the dog. If I don't, I keep being the man who chose wrong because it kept his hands employed. He lifted his chin. I'll speak. Nathan nodded once. Then we'll write it down with dates and names. He paused. The sheriff will try to make this your fault. And James's say you both misread numbers, overreacted, caused panic. Henry's mouth tightened. He can say whatever helps him sleep. I'll speak what I carried. He touched the jacket again, thumb finding the fused. The town deserves breath that doesn't taste like lies. The welder ticked as it cooled. Outside, sleet began to ping the yard. Soft percussion on tin. Nathan packed the photographs, the strip in a swab he took from the coat hem. He sealed and labeled each item. He wrote Henry's name carefully, then asked him to confirm spelling. Henry did, and the signature he put beneath his statement shook but did not falter. Nathan stepped back and looked around the room. The hoist, the chains, the careful rows of tools that never moved unless a job required them. Work meant order here. Pain had bent that order around a secret, but it had not broken it. He reached for the heater and turned it up a notch because confession cools blood. Then he spoke into the room with a softness that carried weight. Ever stood up for the truth? Tell us your story. Henry breathed out like a man who had just set down a beam. I'll come with you, he said. Not tonight. Tomorrow morning. Let me clean this bench, so I don't run from myself in the night. Morning, Nathan agreed. We'll meet at the clinic at 8. You'll see the girl. Remind yourself who this is for. Shadow Rose padded to the door and looked back. Nathan followed. Henry stood and lifted his visor again, as if bracing for sparks he could finally control. The shop smelled the same. Oil, heat, steel, but the air felt different, like winter deciding to break. Nathan stepped into sleet with Shadow at heel, evidence secured, while Henry stood in the doorway ready to speak when morning came. Steadily, steadily, steadily. Frost clung to stone like lace when Maple Ridge gathered beneath strings of dim bulbs that swung in a light wind. The square's fountain stood dry and rimmed with ice. Breath rose from bundled neighbors in pale plumes, drifting and dissolving under a sky the color of tin. Nathan rolled a portable projector onto the flagstones, clipped its legs, and connected a case drive. A rented screen flapped against a stand until 2 volunteers weighted the base with sandbags. Shadow sat near the first row, steady and alert, mapping edges the way only a trained partner can. A murmur ran along the benches when Ellen Price stepped from her shop carrying a tray of paper cups. She set the tray down and looked at Clara as if seeing a different child than the one she had pushed toward the lamppost. Others drifted closer, drawn by curiosity and the town's appetite for a story that finally asked to be heard in daylight. Jake hovered near a planter, hands in pockets, face pale with regret he hadn't learned how to name yet. Nathan tested the speaker and let a tone rise and fade. He said his name, his role, and the reason for this gathering. A review of facts related to the mill fire that had framed a family for years. He kept voice level, pace measured, language plain. He introduced Henry Walsh and said that Henry had chosen to speak. The shop owner stood at the edge of the crowd in a clean denim jacket, shoulders squared, eyes shadowed but clear. He nodded once, accepting the risk he had decided to carry. The projector threw the first image onto the screen, the loading dock under foam, hose loops snaking across slick concrete, and a pickup back to the door. A stir moved through the square. Someone whispered a name. Nathan advanced to the next frame where a hand tilted a can near the tailgate, the label blurred but shape unmistakable. The third photograph showed a shoulder patch shaped like a star. He did not attach captions, preferring silence to do its own work. The screen glowed in the evening dark while neighbors stared at proof they had sensed but avoided. He lifted a photocopied ledger toward the lamp and then cast a scan onto the screen. Lines glowed. Dates, amounts, annotation. The words that had trailed him since the archives appeared in clean blocks, records destroyed and funds rerouted. He displayed entries that pointed to projects that never existed in the index. He moved to a slide capturing a memo where a pencil note used a single word that made his jaw clench. Burned. He showed a photograph of a water-stained carton and another of a slick residue that pooled beneath warped cardboard. Henry stepped forward when called and faced the town he had served, then failed, then resolved to serve again. He spoke in the kind of plain that work gives men who have lifted heavy things. He named what he had carried and why, then said the hardest part, that a man with a star had watched. He did not spit curses. He did not beg forgiveness. He described his part, named accomplices, and accepted whatever answer justice might hand him. A hush settled so firm that you could hear a cup crack as someone gripped it too hard. Nathan invited Clara to speak only if she wished. She stepped onto a milk crate beside the screen. Her knees shook. Her chin lifted anyway. She told them about mornings on the hill where frost chewed fingers, about a rope that burned her skin, about a sister gasping in a room filled with an invisible killer, and about a letter written by a father people had made into a villain because it was easier than looking at friends. She said his name once, softly, then again with strength that surprised her own throat. Faces changed as if weather had shifted. Shadow paced to a corner where a cluster of planks had been stacked for a winter display. He stopped, lifted his head and blew air through his nose. A faint gasoline breath rode the wood. He nudged a loose board, then pawed at brittle wreath straw until a blackened shard rolled free, and tapped the stone. He barked once, heads turned. Nathan crossed, crouched, and slid the shard into a clean bed. Another fleck hid beneath wired ribbon, a curl of char with a rainbow sheen at one edge. He sealed that too. The squares seemed to lean toward the evidence like a single listening body. Ellen stepped to the mic with shoulders tight and words heavier than tins stacked on her counter. She looked at Clara, then at Henry, and then at faces that had shopped in her aisles for years. She apologized without excuses. She admitted she had chosen caution over compassion, because rumor felt like hard data when repeated enough. She said she had been wrong. Other voices joined, some stumbling, some shaking, each finding a way to say the only sentence that matters after harm. I did this, and I will do better, Nathan resumed. He summarized, then invited questions. He described the process that would follow: county involvement, evidence logging under seal, and a request for an external audit of relief funds distributed in the months around the fire. He explained that Henry had signed a sworn statement, and that an investigator from the state would review photographs, ledgers, and samples. He informed the crowd that the sheriff had been notified, and that oversight from outside the region would be present at every step. He added that all materials would be mirrored to multiple secure locations, so loss could not pretend to be error. Shadow lay at Claire's boots and watched the edges again. A baby cried and then quieted under a blanket. An old man crossed himself. Two teenagers held hands tighter than the cold demanded. Church bells marked the half hour. The projector's fan whispered. Light drifted across the square in a thin sheet. The screen showed the ledger one last time. Then Nathan switched to a simple slate, holding a single question in clean type. How can a community make amends? Share your ideas. Suggestions rose carefully at first. Someone offered rides to the clinic, then pledged to stock a cabinet at the church with basic medicine for families who needed help, without paperwork that crushed dignity. A contractor promised to fix the cabin roof before a thaw turned leaks into mold. Ellen said her shop would deliver groceries uphill, pay deferred by agreement instead of shame. A teacher volunteered free tutoring Saturday morning. The pharmacy owner, face bright with tears he didn't hide, said he would set aside cough syrup and drops, costs covered by a fund neighbors could fill without fanfare. Nathan ended with a simple plan. He asked for 5 names for a rotating committee that would meet with county staff once a week while audits took place. He suggested a notice board that listed needs and progress without drama. He asked volunteers to gather receipts for donations, so that giving did not become a contest. He reminded everyone that fairness travels faster when quiet hands move it. He thanked the crowd for listening without shouting. Clara stepped down from the crate. Sophie, bundled to her eyes, reached from Ellen's arms and caught Clara's mittens with one small hand. The market's cold tang mingled with coffee, wool, and the last echo of foam and pictures that finally spoke loud enough to silence gossip. Shadow pressed his head against Clara's knee, then settled as if his body understood that a circle had closed. Nathan powered down the projector. Frost glittered along the rim of the fountain like a crown set aside for mourning. A hush moved through the square, not the silence of fear but the quiet that follows a clean decision. Ellen placed the tray on a bench and began handing cups to anyone whose fingers shook. Henry stood near the back, shoulders squared, keeping his promise to be seen. Nathan looked across the faces and felt winter loosen its grip. He lifted the mic one last time and told them what would happen tomorrow and the day after. No speeches, only he thanked Henry for telling an inconvenient truth and Clara for refusing to disappear. Then he said a sentence that felt like a bridge. "We will do this together, and every page we turn will face daylight." The crowd answered not with cheers but with a rustle of work beginning. Nathan lowered the mic, packed the projector, and walked into the frost with Shadow beside Clara, while Maple Ridge finally chose repair over rumor. Together, 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 together. Sunlight melted the last crusts of snow along the hill road, where the old cabin once leaned against winter. In its place stood a bright, low building with wide windows, a sloped roof that shed rain like a shrug, and a sign carved from reclaimed beams: Evans Community Home. Daffodils trembled along a new path. Young maples held tight fists of green that would unfurl by noon. The front door opened to warm wood, fresh paint, and the sound of chairs sliding as children gathered for stories before lunch. Clara Evans stood near a book cart, healthy and steady, hair tied back with a ribbon that matched the sky. She greeted arrivals by name, then knelt to straighten a shoelace and fix a bent corner on a well-loved picture book. Her voice carried without strain now. She asked 3 children to choose a tale about courage or one about kindness, then combined both by picking a story where courage learned to speak gently. She tapped the cover and smiled because the choice fit the room better than a speech ever could. When she read the first line, the room settled the way fields settle after wind passes. Ready to listen, Sophie hurried down the hallway with braces flashing under leggings patterned with tiny clouds. Laughter spilled behind her like a trail that invited everyone to follow. She paused at the doorway, lifted her chin to catch spring air, and then joined her sister. The braces clicked softly when she turned. The sound had stopped being a reminder of worry. It had become a rhythm that matched a strong heartbeat. Nathan Cole stood by the window watching mothers sign in and volunteers hang coats. The badge on his chest still held its shine, yet the new light in his eyes came from something beyond duty. A letter from county headquarters lay folded in his pocket, the kind that offers a promotion with a stipend and a bigger office in a larger town. He had already written a reply. He would not leave. He would stay where a promise had planted roots, where a dog had chosen corners to guard, and where a community had decided to look fully at itself. Shadow lay near the reading rug, chin on paws, ears forward whenever a page turned. When the door swung wider and new shoes squeaked across the floor, he lifted his head to greet without fuss. He approved each arrival with a blink that read like welcome. An apron hung on a hook held pockets full of tennis balls and pencils. The dog preferred pencils late in the day, when attention needed a nudge and games could not waste energy. Children learned to ask permission before offering one. Most of them remembered, and the few who forgot learned the easy way with a gentle paw pressed against a wrist. Ellen Price stepped through carrying 2 long loaves and a bag of oranges. She set the bread on the counter, studied the room, and took a careful breath. Her eyes met Clara's, then Sophie's, then Nathan. She nodded, not because anyone had demanded a script, but because truth made nodding easier than talking. She rolled up her sleeves and began slicing. A college student from the next town washed fruit at the sink. The pharmacy owner stacked small bottles of cough syrup in a cupboard labeled health, each tagged for families who needed help without signing away dignity. Outside, the last thin sheets of ice broke into shining shards that sailed along gutters toward the river. Buds swelled on birch branches. A robin tested a note and committed to song. Locals who had argued last winter now raked together and laughed at how heavy wet leaves can feel when a wheelbarrow refuses to cooperate. The scent of damp soil floated through the open windows along with chalk dust and new pages. The hills smelled like beginnings rather than survival. Clara opened the book and began. The first lines made the group quiet without being told. Words shaped bridges across differences, as easily as a hand spans the gap between chairs. Children leaned in with elbows planted and chins upheld by clean fingers. Sophie sat among them and echoed occasional lines, her voice bright, turning repetition into participation rather than fear. When the story paused for a question, a boy who had once called out from the back raised his hand first and waited. His patience felt like a small victory the whole room could share. Nathan checked the clock and the angle of sunlight along the floor. He still moved like a patrol officer in his head, counting exits and noting sounds that did not fit. He also carried a softer checklist now: full shelves, warm coats, steady heat, stocked cabinets, and names pronounced correctly. He spoke quietly with a grandmother who whispered about a nephew beginning to read. He promised to bring a spare lamp for a desk that wobbled. He wrote it down in a small notebook he had started calling the daylight log. Shadow rose and padded toward the hallway. He stopped near a door that led to storage and lifted his nose toward a gap where new lumber waited for shelves. He sniffed, found nothing that asked for alarm, and returned to the rug with a satisfied exhale. His work had changed shape without losing purpose. Instead of intercepting harm, he recognized calm, and that recognition kept the space honest. A group from the high school arrived with seed trays and sketches for a garden. They unfolded a plan for raised beds in a compost bin, built from pallets. The hardware store would donate. An electrician from the mill's successor company brought a coil of wire and promised brighter exterior lights before dusk. A retired teacher offered to run an evening class for parents whose workdays stretched late. A baker who had once doubted every new effort delivered cupcakes with small flags printed with the word "we," short, true, and enough. Ellen carried plates to the tables and paused to listen. The room held a harmony she had not known to expect. It came from chairs sliding without scraping, from children speaking without shouting, and from adults choosing action over comment. She turned to Nathan. "We can start a pantry here," she said. "Deliveries on Thursdays, pickups Mondays. No questions beyond what helped." He nodded and wrote her name beneath a list of leads drawn from people who had volunteered after the meeting in the square. When she smiled, the room felt warmer than the heater could manage alone. Clara finished the chapter and closed the book with a soft clap of paper. The children clapped louder because endings deserve recognition even when more pages wait. She asked each listener to choose a word that belonged inside a home, built for healing. They answered with kindness, safety, light, warmth, honesty, and laughter. Sophie added songs and nobody argued. A small girl shyly handed Clara a drawing of a house with a rainbow chimney that lifted steam made of hearts. Clara tucked it into a frame that would hang by the door. Nathan opened the front door and let air sweep through rooms painted the color of sunlight on bread. He looked at the hill and saw boots trudging up the way they had that icy morning, except today. Feet walked without flinching. He unfolded a letter from headquarters and read one line again to be certain. He had not misread the offer. He put it away and leaned against the doorframe, feeling the grain under his palm, thinking about every corner shadow now called his. He had chosen a smaller map and a deeper purpose. A brass plaque waited by the entrance for an unveiling that would come at noon when the mayor stopped by with a ribbon and shears. Nathan read the inscription in his head anyway. In honor of James Evans, who told the truth when lies were easier. The words felt right because the morning had proved them. Henry Walsh would walk up the path before lunch with a box of nails and a promise to fix shelves. The county auditor would arrive after school dismissal to review receipts. The new sheriff appointed by the board after interviews that asked hard questions would stand near the back and listen more than he spoke. Clara moved from table to table with a small laminated card that outlined homework times, clinic hours, and phone numbers for rides. She slipped one into a coat pocket she knew belonged to a boy whose grandmother never remembered schedules. Sophie helped tape a poster that explained how to borrow books without fear of fines. The poster used plain lines in friendly shape. It told the truth about responsibility and grace without preaching, proof that good design can carry more mercy than a long announcement. Lunch began. Bowls steamed. Bread warmed hands. Oranges shone like captured dawn. Ellen sat in a chair near the sink and let others carry trays. Because leading had finally learned to share. A volunteer refilled water, pitchers. The carpenter returned the coat tree to a respectful angle. The room took a long, satisfied breath, the way fields breathe after rain. Nathan stepped onto the porch with Shadow and watched sunlight glitter across puddles that no longer hid ice. Buds at the edge of the path widened into honest leaves. A child shouted his name from the doorway and asked if the dog could show the pencil trick after sandwiches. He said yes. He pulled the small notebook and added 2 lines. Finish the ramp handrail. Order more mittens before next cold front. He tucked the book away and rested a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, then waited for the next task. He turned back inside as Clara gathered children for an afternoon chapter. She looked toward the entry, caught his eye, and tilted her head in a wordless thank you that traveled across the room like sunlight through clean glass. He returned the nod and stood near the back where helpers tend to hover, ready to move chairs, carry boxes, or say the single sentence that keeps work honest. "I can help." The building settled around them without groaning. Pipes hummed. A clock clicked. Outside, the river moved without ice for the first week since autumn. A wind chime at the corner rang once and then rested, like a bell satisfied with its own proof of weather. Spring had not finished arriving, but it had given enough evidence to call itself real. This story needs to be heard. Share it with someone who craves hope. Comment your city or a prayer to join us. Subscribe to keep these truths alive.